Okay, now the time comes for open discussion. The floor is open. We've had a reservoir of insights, a reservoir of experiences, a reservoir of a lot. So the floor is open, and I can see on your faces you're raring to make your comments, you're raring to ask questions. So at this point, I see Dr. James. She has a mic in her hand, and let's hit the road. Let's hit the road. Let's hit. Yeah. Comments, questions, affirmation, anything that you like. Okay, so we good.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. I'm Adrian Sunarine from the St. Andrew's Theological College, Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago. And we celebrate with you. We celebrate the 80 years. We were established in 1892, so we're a little older. But we celebrate with you. And I was thinking particularly of our own student, Ms. Stephanie Baldeusing. And I was thinking of what she said in the context of, for example, the crime and the violence in Trinidad. Because so far for the year, I've done 4 funerals for murder victims. And that's for this year, 2024. We're still saying Happy New Year. But we have such a culture of violence and hostility that I think Ms. Stephanie's words, continuing from what we heard from Paba, are so true that if we reconnect with who we are meant to be in Christ, then we really would solve this gap between theology and ministry, between what we say and who we are, and Paba pointed that out as well, the hypocrisy that's often professed and proclaimed compared to the actions that are done. And it would be a good cure for ourselves and for our society, and truly create the kind of peace and the kind of courtesy and respect and love that we need in order to truly thrive as a society. Thank you.
June Johnson.
I just want to say thanks to Stephanie, because I think, you know, she has articulated something that is very powerful. I mean, I've been part of this whole thing for a very long time. And I just think that whole, in a sense, I think it's a woman who would bring it out. I think that's extremely important. We have our pots and pans theologian, and age and wisdom is known. But we struggle to always feel that this is the way to do theology. Or am I, you know, the whole academic desk theology thing has, you know, and, you know, she started about talking, you know, the things that comes in for exams and preparation and doing papers and presenting things that sometimes, certainly in my, chokes what is deep inside, and that you understand is also the truth and the reality that we are powerful people. And, you know, and that we have to find our voice. And quite often, the voice comes from pain and from not wanting to rock the boat because you're expected to, you know, toe the line. But, you know, I think, Stephanie, I listen to Paba and I understand all of this. You know, we've been through this, all the, you know, all the different conferences you have, and when people, you know that there's something that is real here. This is who we are. This is what we must say. But that whole personal owning of who we are and the voice that we have to have, and not be afraid to speak the truth in love. Thank you.
Thank you, June. Thank you for that affirmation. Any hand? While you you consider your questions or your comments, I'd like to ask Pablo a personal question, particularly for the students who are currently, doing theology, learning to do theology. Was there any childhood experience, any raw childhood experience in the St. Lucian cultural context that inspired you, that became the foundation for the kind of theological work and theological reflection that you have been engaged in over the last several decades?
Well, in terms of childhood experience, I was sharing with the seminarians this afternoon that it was Master at St. Mary's College who encouraged a number of us to go and join the bishop, go to meeting the bishop and so forth. And then the bishop had Julie Mangoes, so the Julie Mangoes kept. But for me, when I had to make a decision to come to seminary, my mom was really totally against it. And one of the reasons why she was against it was, of course, she said, later on, she told me that later on, she knew how racist the society was. And for me at that time, to go into that priesthood thing, I was, I was going to suffer, which I did quite a bit. So entering into seminary, we had our challenges there, but I can't think of any particular thing in my childhood. I shared with them a dream which I had. I had my sort of moment when I had to make a decision. It was a very, very difficult moment because my mom did not want me to become a priest, and my dad was not around. He was in Guyana, and he had to actually come home to permit me to come over here. And the society, because I grew up very poor environment, my mother was a market vendor and I was doing very well in school. People had hopes that I was going to be a doctor, a lawyer, some kind of big thing like that, So when priest. So when I decided to become a priest, my mother she told me, put me out. If you want to go by the bishop. So it was not really an encouraging thing in that sense. So it was a struggle. But in terms of my own childhood, to see anything that really led me to the priesthood. I had an aunt, they told me, she was a church mouse, and she always used to drag me to church. That's what they told me. I was a little boy. I don't know if that influenced in any way, but But in terms of my own consciousness, when I decided to become a priest because Leonard Alfonso was a good teacher at St. Mary's College, encouraged a number of us, and went by the bishop. The bishop told us about priesthood. We didn't take him on or not. But eventually, when we had to make decisions to come over, I went through that crisis. And the crisis led me to a dream that told me that that's what God wanted of you. So I don't know if that I have to. Yep.
I remember my time at the seminary here was particularly exciting, particularly my sessions with Father Henry Charles. And he was teaching us how to use Caribbean literature to build a theology. Now, at the same time, there was a Benedictine prior in one of the Caribbean islands who was appointed secretary to the nuncio in Trinidad. And he said to take up this position, he would like to be able to live in a Benedictine monastery. So he came and he stayed with us. And at the same time, I was studying here, and he would engage me regularly well, what are you studying? And who is teaching you? And what are you learning about theology? And I would start telling him what I found most exciting was the rector, Henry Charles, teaching us how to use Caribbean literature, and I would even bring books for him, and we would have good discussions. Now, please, I'm not saying that this is connected, but soon after that, somehow Henry Charles was no longer the rector. I'm not saying this is connected. And they appointed a bishop. Now, honestly, I was hurt. Now, Bishop John Menz is a good man, but I felt Henry was very challenging. So that was one experience I wanted to share.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abba. Any questions, comments? I see Father Emmanuel. And while give a response in terms of what were you getting? What was impacting you when you listened to particularly the Paba story? So begin thinking about a comment or a question. Okay, Father.
Your Grace, your Very Reverend Monsignore, our dear priest, and everybody who must have graced this occasion, this theological conference. Good afternoon, everyone. We're talking about the apostolic letter Ad Theologiam Promovendam to promote theology or profound sex. And from what I was able to glean from this write-up, it says that theology must be fundamentally contextual, capable of reading and interpreting the gospel in the conditions in which men and women live daily in different geographical, social, and cultural environments. There is one issue that was raised in that document. You talk about, especially in the fiducial supplicants or supplicating trust, the declaration on blessings issued by Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez under the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. This is where I want to ask the question now. If theology is to be practiced from a contextual framework, can we say that the issue of blessing same-sex union, is it not impositional? And there have been, it's something that has elicited a lot of reactions from different cultural backgrounds, even including here. And some people rejected it outrightly because their law does not permit that. And if people in the same-sex union should come to the priest and say, please, Father, bless us, and in obedience you do that, and maybe they do the sign of the cross and continue in their relationship and all of that. So my problem is hinge on contextualism. That is my problem. That if theology is to be practiced from a contextual viewpoint or from contextual perspective, would we not say that it is a contradiction in terms if every culture must adopt that idea? Because the philosophers say, principle of non-contradiction says a thing cannot be and not be at the same time. Otherwise, it will be a contradiction. And in law, you say you cannot approbate and reprobate. You can't blow hot and cold at the same time. Some people have written something saying that mere blessing is an affirmation. If you bless same-sex union, you have already affirmed what they are doing. And the document also provides that it does not in any way, negate the fact that marriage is a union of man and woman. It does not negate the Catholic doctrine on marriage as a union for man and woman. So when we bless these people, are we affirming what they are doing? And if we affirm it and at the same time believe that marriage is an exclusive union between a man and woman, for the partnership of the whole of life, and at the same time, we concede to that blessing. So my problem is, within a contextual frame of work or frame of mind, is it not a contradiction in terms?
Okay. The diversity of context, Paba, any response to that?
With all due respects to the writer, to the speaker, I find that one of the problems with us in the Caribbean is that people bring their problems to us and they try to make us give answers to their problems. For me, this whole issue, that is not an issue for Caribbean people. That is an issue that's part of the whole colonial context where people have been imposing their values, their attitudes, their approaches, their lifestyles on us. And we as Caribbean people should continue to determine who we are, how we behave, and don't let people's behavior outside and their problems become our problems. So my simple answer to this whole thing is that, you see, all of this business, there is a North American, European issue that because of their power and whatnot, they're influencing the whole world, and they want to dictate to the whole world, and that is part of the colonial legacy. And I abandoned colonial a long time ago. Long time ago. So if people who have their own kind of warped values, warped attitudes and whatnot, I mean, I'm hearing people talking about, supposing a dog, somebody will come and say they want to marry a dog and whatnot. Hello? What does this have to do with the Caribbean? We people in the Caribbean, we don't think these are not our values, our problems, our issues. Huh? Those are other people's problems. Let other people deal with that. Huh? That's my
Thank you. Our brother. And then, Archbishop.
Two things about the question raised just now. I think there is a difficulty of language. In the first place, blessing is used loosely to mean approval. Give me a blessing for this. I am deciding to do so. Give me your approval. But I think that blessing in a biblical sense is openness to God's grace. So that if I ask a blessing of God, it is a kind of portal, a kind of window, where
I open myself to God's saving grace. And opening myself to God's saving grace will always mean turning away from sin and believing the gospel. As we say, when on Ash Wednesday, when the imposition of ashes, you turn away from sin and believe the gospel. So I think in this case, it probably has something to do with language. Blessing in the sense, not approval, but an openness to God's saving grace, because God's grace is always saving us, turning us around from whatever is skewed, whatever is wrong, whatever is not of Him, and giving us an opportunity to turn around, which is conversion.
Thanks, brother, for that input, for that explanation.
The second thing is...
there's a second point, okay.
The second thing has to do with the context and so. I just want to share a little bit about my journey as a liturgical musician. Now, I grew up in a family where my mother was a piano teacher, and so Bach and Beethoven and Brahms were standard fare. I come to the monastery, and I am seduced by Gregorian chants. I get a scholarship, and I go to Paris, and there I do chant, and then I meet a man called Joseph Jalino, and another man called Lucien Dice. And they gave me a different idea of liturgical music. And then I come back to the Caribbean, and Archbishop Pantin asked me to do something, to help people to compose local stuff. I remember the late Archbishop Samuel Carter saying, there are enough people with LRSM and LTCL to line the way from Kingston to Montego Bay, but nobody will compose stuff. And so I had to dig deep in myself because, if you pardon my expression, I really was a kind of Afro-Saxon. And then I really began to discover another side of me. And that other side, that discovery was helped by Father Michel de Verteuil. He had taken us to a calypso thing under the trees in Normandy. And everybody was kind of swaying to the music, and everybody knew all the lyrics, and so you had David Rudder and David Barrow and so on. And then I began to understand from the inside, if you like, that I was not just an Afro-Saxon, that I was a Caribbean person, and that rhythm was really the great gift to Caribbean people. And that turned me around. So that I'm a kind of evangelist right now, trying to help people to use Caribbean rhythms in composition and not be a slave to North America and to Britain and to wherever else. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to recognize our Zoom audience. Welcome to our Zoom audience who have joined us online. And in a short while, we will get a question or a comment from our Zoom audience. I think Archbishop Jason, and then we'll take a question or comment from the Zoom audience. Then we do Father Martin, and then Angelo. Mike?
First, I'd really like to thank Abba and Stephanie for leading us through that really wonderful reflection. The reflection of the years and the reflection of the heart. Both were very wonderful and really complemented each other in such a wonderful way. Thank you very much for that. Context is not something that the Caribbean invented. They have 4 Gospels for a reason. And they can't be reduced to one, nor can they be brought into one. They have four Gospels because each of the writers wrote from a different context. Context in theology began long before Caribbean people were Caribbean people. And those who claim that there's no context in theology and that there is some standardized theology, all they're doing is making one context a norm above all the other contexts. All they're doing is making European theology the norm for all contextual theology. But European theology is a contextual theology. It has always been a contextual theology. And if we start understanding that, then it's really, as Paba was explaining, a colonial shift. Because once you make one context norm for everyone else, then our context and our experiences don't matter. And so the real challenge is not whether or not theology is contextual, is whose context is going to be driving the questions and the responses to theology that we're going to be having in the formation and in this experience of seminary. That's really the question for me. Now, I have been really intrigued by this back and front on the document, on the blessings. And up to now, I've not heard, and maybe I missed it, but I've not heard someone start a reflection on common law unions and what this document means for common law unions for us in the Caribbean. We have had common law unions for 400 years, long before America, long before Europe, this is a historical structure that has come out of both slavery and plantation system. And it's not as if people in common law unions are doing something because they're free to do other things. This is a historical structure. It was a residual of grabbing or struggling for something that was humane in a very inhuman experience. Now, we have, in our context, to read that document from the perspective of common law unions. So take out the same sex for the while. Africa has to read it in the context of polygamy. That's a big contextual challenge in Africa. So each of us have our context, but I would love to hear something of what the document means for our people in common law unions. And many of our priests from a certain stage on have come out of either common law unions or single parent households. What does that mean? And they are a blessing to their family. So what does that mean? I think we have to do the contextual theology and really start from our context and not look at just what the European or the American or the African context, all interesting to us, but we have a reflection to do here. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, I am always rooted in my Caribbean context. Huh? The belly of the Caribbean. And let me tell you, anyone who has studied Caribbean history, who has studied the forced separation of families as part of the trade, don't forget, our society was a trade industry. Huh? The separation of families was an industry because if you had people of the same families who could speak the same language, their productivity was low. They could plot, they could create turmoil. So families were forcibly separated. More than that, sexual relations, again, was a trade thing. Slaves were brought to certain places like Redonda, where the women were impregnated by strong slaves so they could get good products, because don't forget, we're not talking about human beings. We're talking about production. Huh? So that when a son born from that relationship was strong, that means that the plantation had good workers. That's the situation in the Caribbean. When you understand the history of the Caribbean, you will laud the kind of relationships that we have. We call it common law kind of thing. That, despite all of that, we have people who are able to enter into stable relationship. That shows to us the quality of the resilience of the Caribbean person. Study your history, and from that context, talk about those things.
Thank you for the response. Do we have before you go, Father Martin, do we have a comment or question from our Zoom audience? Anything on the chat? No, I can't see. Can somebody read from?
Okay. So Crystal writes that 2 interesting responses to the same-sex blessing question. Contextual considerations of the issue are we versus them, church and secular politics versus we Caribbean context and language. What do we mean by blessing? A deeper exploration of the issue and how we respond to the layman's questions will also be appreciated. Break it down further for teenagers in our congregations in basic language. The social media sensationalization fuels confusion. We need to use people's the people's language in the people's spaces to this issue.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal, for that comment. We do Father Martin, Angelo, and then Father Jason, and then as I have also challenged one of our theological students to come up with a comment or a question. Okay, Father Martin.
Okay. I just want to underline a point about culture, because we might be talking about contextualization of theology without, going deeply into the way of life of the people. I've been listening and I've been eager to hear something about the culture of the people. How do we make theology more of taking flesh in the life of the people? Because in my own seminary in Nigeria, we had a course that is called enculturation. So I was thinking that if we can imbibe that attitude of having enculturation as a course, it can also help to deepen whatever we have, the message of the gospel, whatever we have to give to the people. It's not the question of saying maybe everybody can theologize, but my point is this: how do we make this message of the gospel palpable to the life of a Caribbean person in terms of the music, calypso, soca, and many other aspects of Caribbean life? For me, that should be our point of discussion anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're looking forward for you doing a calypso in your parish one day, preaching in a Carnival Friday. We look forward to that, Father Martin. Angelo.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is a question, I think, more, I guess, for the seminarian students to answer. But do you all think that the seminary promotes a culture of being able to question, being able to dialogue, even being able to challenge? I mean, we hear Pablo talk about challenge. And at least in my own studies, the way I was formed is like we were told the theologians were meant to kind of, balance the magisterium rather than submit. Like magisterium all in front there. You know?
Magisterium all in front.
No, but I mean, on a real note, do you all feel that you all could engage with your lecturers, challenge your lecturers, and then, I guess for your lecturers too, if not, how do we then help our students feel comfortable enough to be able to feel like they can challenge and they can ask questions?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, it's the seminarians to answer, if they feel like a challenge or not.
Okay. All right, so we allow the seminarians to contemplate that question, and if someone wants to respond later, that would be grateful. Father Jason, and then Father Jason, and then Everett, and then Jared. We have about 10 minutes to go. So if we ask that you make your comments and your questions to the point, brief.
So again, thank you very much for Stephanie and for Paba for really exploring a wonderful reflection on contextual theology. At the heart of contextual theology, I believe, is really the pastoral output. The church in the Caribbean, the church, and at least the Catholic Church, our numbers are falling. Our people are becoming more and more separated from the church and from the meaning. The youth are growing in atheism and agnosticism. And I think contextual theology is really to make the church, bring the church closer to the people, to bridge that gap between life, experiences, and the church, to bring meaning to people's lives. And this is at the heart and center. And so I'm very glad where Stephanie was able to explore the existential reality that can touch every person on existential periphery. And Pamba was able to engage at a deeper level as to the groundings, the real groundings of who we are and the challenges of who we are and how we are speaking the language of our people. So I think herein lies one of the great challenges of the colonial heritage that we have inherited. As we continue to strive to do this theology in our context, in our time, and for a new generation, I think we would see greater relevance and greater what we call mission and evangelization. So this is not just Pope Francis's coming up with something. It's tied to synod, it's tied to mission, it's tied to relevance, it's tied to the church. And I just want to say to the lecturers that this is in fact also a way by which we are called to teach. That I know we already do it, but this is a way in which we are called to impart the knowledge and to structure all that we do as lecturers, really engaging the experiences of the people, of our students, so that they may indeed be enriched to go out and do the same with others. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Father Jason. And based on what Father Jason said, I hope that students of a particular theological course will remember the term forced theology, and that you haven't forgotten it after the exams. Everett, and then Jared. Everett, Jared.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you. Thank you to the presenters and to all the contributors. So Papa used one word. He mentioned silos. And that reminded me of an article in this week's Catholic News, which is headlined, "From Silos to Synod." And it speaks about what is described as the Belmont Pastoral Campus, where I think potentially all of the various commissions within the Catholic Church in this country, in this archdiocese, are brought together, as it were, under one roof. And the article spoke about the importance of people from different departments or different commissions and so on being able to pray together and so on. So silos, so in other words, these departments have moved out from the different silos into this one campus, so-called. Of course, we have inherited and we have come from the Roman Catholic silo. And while it is very important from an organizational point of view and so on to bring things together. The danger is that we forget that we are in this Catholic silo. So it's amazing when you read the titles of the different departments and different commissions. Most of them begin with Catholic this, Catholic that, Catholic. So it's all within the Catholic silo. And I'm thinking, as we are in the week of prayer for Christian unity, that one of the things that we need to remember is the Lord's Prayer, that all may be one. I'm pleased that we have Reverend Adrian Tunerine and our dear Stephanie with us. But openness to learn from, in other words, the context, the other Christian groups in our context, to learn from, to be challenged by, and so forth, is something that I think we need to remember when we think of ourselves in our silo. Thank you.
Thank you, Everett. Thank you.
Thank you. And just before we go to Jared Granado, I also want to mention, because Dr. Johnson did mention Reverend Sunerine and Stephanie Balyosing, but also with us we have Reverend Fazaluddin Hussain, Hussain, right, I have it, of the CUC College. So it's very good to have that Seventh-day Adventist presence with us as well. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Everett took one of the battles that I would have run with, so that's okay. But it's an important point, I think, and with talking about culture, we have to also embrace that aspect, the ecumenical aspect, and the interfaith aspect also of our culture. It is absolutely critical. And the siloed living is really quite a shame for our societies, and because that's just not how the essence of our societies is structured. Reverend Sunerine, when he introduced himself, he said he was from St. Andrew's Presbyterian College. And that is true, but St. Andrew's has had a very long history of ecumenism and ecumenical partnership and interrelations. As a young theological graduate, a rookie, working with the celebrity of Idris Hamid, I was, as a Roman Catholic, part and parcel of that. And Idris would have asked me to lecture to some of the students on Friday evenings and Saturdays and so on. So a couple of the former moderators, as they say, passed through, my tutelage, I would think. Now, Baba, you took us back donkey years, as they say. And for those of us who know these precincts well, the very room that we are sitting in here was called at one time, I think, the music room. I see Monsignor, the recreation room and the music room and so on. And so people used to bring back, after August vacation, seminarians coming back would bring different types of music from their own country, wherever it was, and so on. And that was a wonderful kind of blend. One of the names that was not called this afternoon was Terry Julian, a man who worked tirelessly to root catechesis in the culture of the Caribbean. That was Father Terry Julian at the time. He lived here in the seminary with us and had a tremendous influence on how we thought. Let me move rapidly, and I'm so very happy that Archbishop Jason said what he said. When I was a fellow at Birmingham University and the then ecumenical Celio colleges, there was a department which was meant to highlight the work, the theological work of the third world, so-called. And in charge of that department was one of my colleagues from Sri Lanka, he was. And we had a run-in conflict. I would say the name of the department was Contextual Theology. And his name was a big, long Sri Lankan name, so we used to call him Sugi, just the first part of it. So I said, Sugi, what is this about contextual theology? I said, why is it that everybody else's theology is just theology, but when it comes to the third world, so-called, it becomes contextual theology? I think by definition and by nature, theology is contextual, wherever it comes from. The biblical, the medieval, the patristic, whichever one. And I think what we have to do, as what Papa was saying, and what he has literally suffered for over years, is to own our context. I think that is the important thing. And we need to get into some serious work. I remember also doing postgraduate work at Edinburgh, there was a department called Theology in the Non-Western World. These things really make you think, eh? They really make you ask questions. And well, that's like some of us who like to talk about non-Catholics, you know. Idris Ahmed was one who told me once that he had a tremendous conversion experience with that because he was very busy in an interfaith gathering talking about non-Christians and non-Christians. And then when the Hindu Pundit came to the lectern to give his own talk, he said, and I want to invite all non-Hindus to. Okay? So that sets the context, if we wish. The final point I want to make, well, so to just tie up that, the question of our own philosophical frameworks and so on is very, very critical. And again, you know, I can't remember whether it was in Birmingham or Edinburgh, but once I saw a postgrad course advertised, and the history of ideas, and that's Karl Marx and Kant and so on, as if there was no Aimé Césaire, there was no C.L.R. James, there was, you understand what I mean? No Marcus Garvey and so on. I think these are the serious things we have to grapple with and feed what's going on. And to the final point, and I'm glad that...
I thought that was the final one.
No, I just want to root Pascal's testimony there. And to say that, I don't know if Everett maybe remember, because he was one of my markers. In those days, it was called Caribbean Studies paper. And the one that I did, the thesis of that was rhythm as the symbol, Caribbean people's symbol for God. Rhythm as Caribbean people's symbol for God. And I think there again you can see the link, because I used a European philosopher, Tillich, to do work on the Caribbean reality. So we have our work, as they say, cut out.
Thank you very much, Jared. So we are scheduled to begin Mass at 5:30, but we began around 10 minutes late, which now it's 5:40, so we're scheduled to end at 5:40. However, it would be a participatory deficit if we did not get a response or a question or a comment from one of our theological students. Wow, I see plenty of hands going up. So you can choose which one. Okay, we only have space for one. Okay, great.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Anselm, and I'm so happy to be here today to experience this. And I want to respond to what my brother asked, and to be sincere in the question he asked. I must tell you that to be a lecturer in this contemporary society, especially in the seminary, is not an easy task. And to lecture these days, you have to come prepared to receive a lot of blows. And I must tell you,
Thanks for recognizing that.
and I must acknowledge the work of our lecturers. They are really taking the blows and giving the necessary responses. And to be frank with everyone here, we have the freedom to speak and to say how it is. And I must say that the lecturers, they are doing a fantastic job. But I have a question to ask. In the contemporary society, we are now discussing about contextuality or contextualization or inculturation. Now, coming from an African background, I want to ask a particular question. What is the culture to inculturate? And in what context are we contextualizing? What is the culture to inculturate? And in what context are we contextualizing?
Okay.
Because
All right.
we are speaking a lot of big grammars, and what context are we contextualizing? Let me give an instance.
Okay.
About in next 2 months, we'll be talking about Carnival.
It's right here.
Okay, it's right here. So it will be good for us to have a context to contextualize. If we are contextualizing in the Carnival, what is the culture of the Caribbean that we have to inculturate in the theology or in a theological praxis?
Okay. All right.
What is the culture?
Okay. So it's only fitting that we have our guest speaker to respond to that as a closing remark. And then afterwards we will then ask Monsignor Cuthbert to give the vote of thanks.
One of the things that Pope Francis mentioned was that he said that we have to begin thinking about thinking. It's a text here. We have to begin thinking about thinking. At Safford's Community College in St. Lucia, we had a conference on unthink. Unthink. If you follow those issues I'm going, in other words, we have to get out of the silo of this is how you think, this is how you see. You have to recognize the limitations of your own place. I won't use the word context, but your own place. Once you realize the limitations of your own place, you realize that there are other places, and therefore your reality is not the only reality. You have to recognize that those with power can make their reality impact your reality in such a way that you begin to think about yourself the way people think about you. You begin to see yourself the way people see you. You begin to talk about yourself the way people talk about you. In other words, you begin to ape. You monkey. You begin to monkey. You can look at a parrot and you say, hello. The parrot will say, hello. Good morning. Good morning. Parrot. But it is a parrot. It's parroting. It's not thinking. It's a mechanical thing. So just apply that to the whole process of how we think is how we have been socialized to think. The values that we think are good values and what are the values that people have imposed upon us. So we have to bring in, what's the word? Hermeneutic suspicion. We have to become critical. Paulo Freire called it critical consciousness. Because so much of our reality, we have been domesticated. You've heard of the book, The Domestication of the Savage Mind? We have been taught how to be, how to live, how to think. We have been taught that. And we think that we are so we have to be aware to be aware. What the Holy Father said, we have to think about thinking. We have to rethink thinking. Or we have to unthink. Make sense? Think about it.
And so we've come to not just the close of this afternoon's session, but I think we can say we've come to the close of the 80th anniversary of that anniversary. I can't think of a better way to have done this. We have heard quite a bit, a lot. We've had a lot of food for thought, as we like to say. Much of what we've heard, things to be developed, to continue along the path that we've sort of indicated here about contextuality and contextualization. We would not forget those words, I'm sure, for a while. It has been a very useful time together here at this particular very, very important moment in the life of the seminary. I'd like to just thank Paba for so graciously accepting the invitation. And for all our presenters, respondent, thank you very much, and all who have participated in this evening's event. Perhaps as we leave this particular time, as we move on, this year, this particular event could be a moment of rejuvenation. I know we had talked about, or we had considered different names and different titles for this event. One was Revolution. Didn't make it. But there is much here for us to chew on and for us to move forward with. May what we have experienced be a blessing for our continuing work as seminary and what we will do in the coming years. So once again, thank you, Paba. Thank you all for being here and for participating in this evening's session. Thank you again.